Before there were corporate boardrooms with PowerPoint presentations and quarterly earnings reports, there was a dimly lit back room in New York City and a Sicilian immigrant named Charles Lucky Luciano, who ran crime like a Fortune 500 company before Fortune 500 companies even existed. He was born Salvatore Lucania in 1907 in a small, dusty town in Sicily called Lercata Fridi. His family crossed the Atlantic in 1906, chasing the same dream millions of immigrants carried in their pockets, a better life in America. They landed in the teeming slums of Manhattan's Lower East Side, where poverty was not just a condition, but a culture. Streets were crowded, opportunities were scarce, and survival required creativity. For young Salvatore, who would soon rename himself Charles Luciano, the streets of New York were not a dead end, they were a classroom. By the age of 10, he was already running a protection racket, charging Jewish kids in the neighborhood a penny or two a week to walk them to school safely. If they refused, they got beat up. It was crude, yes, but it was also his first business model. One kid who refused to pay was a scrawny Jewish boy named Meyer Lansky. Instead of backing down, Lansky fought back. Luciano was so impressed that he didn't just stop bullying him, he made him his lifelong partner and closest friend. That friendship would later become one of the most powerful alliances in the history of organized crime. What made Luciano genuinely different from every gangster before him was one simple but revolutionary idea. He didn't care what ethnicity you were, as long as you were smart and useful. In the 1920s, the American underworld was hopelessly tribal. The Italian gangs hated the Irish gangs. The Jewish mobs operated separately. Everyone was territorial, suspicious, and constantly killing each other over turf. It was chaotic, inefficient, and ultimately self-destructive. Luciano looked at this mess and saw not tradition worth preserving, but waste worth eliminating. He built deep, trusting relationships with Jewish gangsters like Lansky and Bugsy Siegel, Irish figures and politicians across party lines. He treated organized crime less like a street gang and more like a multinational enterprise. He wanted profits, not pride. Prohibition, the period from 1920 to 1933 when alcohol was banned across America, handed criminals a gift so enormous it was almost unfair. Luciano seized it. He became heavily involved in bootlegging, flooding New York with illegal liquor and making millions. But he also diversified. Heroin trafficking, prostitution rings, gambling operations, and labor union racketeering all fell under his expanding empire. By the late 1920s, he was working directly under two of the most powerful mafia bosses in America, Joe Masseria and Salvatore Maranzano. Both men were old-school Sicilian traditionalists, stubborn, violent, and deeply resistant to change. They spent their time fighting each other in what became known as the Castellamarese War, a brutal mafia conflict that left bodies across New York. Luciano watched this war with growing frustration. He saw it as business suicide. His solution was breathtakingly ruthless. He had both bosses killed. First Masseria, then Maranzano. In one swift, calculated move, he cleared the entire board of the old generation and installed himself at the top. But Luciano didn't just take power. He redesigned the entire structure of American organized crime. In 1931, he called a national meeting of mafia leaders from across the United States and proposed something that had never existed before: the Commission, a governing body for organized crime in America. It would settle disputes, divide territories, authorize major operations, and prevent the kind of bloody wars that had been draining everyone's resources. Each major city would have its own crime family, and no single boss could declare war without commission approval. This wasn't just crime, this was governance. Luciano had essentially created a shadow government operating beneath the surface of American society, complete with its own rules, structure, and enforcement mechanisms.
The commission he built in 1931 continued to function for decades after his death, which is perhaps the most extraordinary testament to just how well designed his system truly was. Special Prosecutor Thomas Dewey launched an aggressive campaign against organized crime in New York and made Luciano his primary target. In 1936, Luciano was convicted on 62 counts of compulsory prostitution, a charge many historians still debate in terms of its full accuracy, and sentenced to 30 to 50 years in prison. It was a stunning development. The most powerful criminal in America was behind bars. But even from his prison cell in Dannemora, New York, Luciano continued to run his organization. Prison walls slowed him down. They didn't stop him. In 1942, a French ocean liner called the SS Normandy caught fire and sank in New York Harbor. The U.S. Navy feared Nazi sabotage and was deeply worried about the security of the New York waterfront. The docks were controlled by the mob. So American naval intelligence did something extraordinary. They went to Luciano in prison and asked for his help. Luciano reportedly used his connections to ensure the waterfront was protected from enemy sabotage and helped facilitate communication with the Sicilian Mafia ahead of the Allied invasion of Sicily in 1943, an operation that may have saved thousands of American lives by smoothing the military's path through the island. The U.S. government never fully confirmed the details, but in 1946, New York Governor Thomas Dewey, the very man who had prosecuted Luciano, commuted his sentence in recognition of his wartime cooperation. There is beautiful irony in that. The man who put him away also set him free. Luciano was deported to Italy, never allowed to return to American soil. He spent his remaining years moving between Italy and Cuba, attempting to rebuild his influence from abroad, always watched, always followed, never quite free. He died of a heart attack at Naples Airport in 1962 at the age of 64. Lucky Luciano never wrote a book, never gave a TED Talk, and never appeared on the cover of Forbes. But he restructured an entire criminal industry, brokered peace where there was only war, and created institutional frameworks that outlived him by generations. Whether you see him as a villain or a visionary, and he was undeniably both, his impact on American history is written not just in crime files, but in the very architecture of how power organizes itself in the shadows.